Hey, church. It's June 3rd. I hope you're well. What a week. Wow. You've probably, like me, been sitting around watching the news like, what is going on? What has happened? Maybe you're young enough that you've never even lived through anything quite as maddening as this. And this thing is maddening. I mean, it's just pure madness. And I was thinking about trying to speak to some of that, trying to answer a really difficult question, which requires a lot smarter head than what I've got. But let me make an attempt. Let me just take a stab at why. Why the madness? I can't answer all the reasons for why the racism, why the systemic racism, or why. And this is not by any means, this is not a political post. I'm not interested in that. Not that I don't think politics matters. It's just that I'm a pastor. I'm not a political analyst. And so really, please don't hear this if you're watching. Don't hear this in that way. I just want to simply talk on a philosophical level, not a political one, as to why. Why are you seeing the things that you're seeing? Why the violence? Why the hatred? Why the inability for us to come together, see the wrongs, see the dehumanizing nature that we slip into, and confess it and repent of it. Whether that's in myself or you or institutions or in the culture, the wider culture, why are we unable to see the groaning of our existence, as Paul would say in Romans, that all creation is groaning? So why? Well, I think we need wisdom. I think that this is a time that if you're looking for answers at all or how to navigate these tumultuous times, I would say at a minimum, you really need to have a heavy diet of wisdom literature from the Bible. Ecclesiastes is a great book I would encourage you to read. Been spending some time there myself. There's a place in Ecclesiastes 2 that I think is helpful to think through, and just in answering the question why. Why has the world come unhinged, so to speak? So there's a place where the preacher who wrote this says in Ecclesiastes 2, he's turning his thoughts to consider wisdom and madness and folly. And he says, what more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? In other words, nothing is new under the sun, right? Like there's nothing new. Like the problems, the madness, the dirty business of life is just, it keeps coming. He's dealing with meaninglessness, right? Like he's facing it. He says, I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light's better than darkness. So in other words, it just makes sense to pursue a life of wisdom over a life of foolishness. Like it's not good to be a fool. That makes sense. But then he says, the wise have eyes in their heads while the fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. In other words, you live a wise life or you live a foolish life. But in the end, both die. Now, bear in mind, and this is important, when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, the preacher is writing in a very raw, realistic way. It's like his approach to talking and thinking about life is as if it's like, let's just talk in ways as if there is no God. Now, he believes in a God, and he'll get into all of that. But it's like, let's talk about life as we face it in real time, what we have to visibly deal with and face, and not talk about what the invisible realities of like a hope in God. So it's just raw honesty, and that's important as you read it. So then he says, then I said to myself, this verse 15, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, it won't be remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise person must die. So he's kind of getting into this it almost comes off very cynical, right? Like it's just like, what's the point? life has the fight of a good life for a good life and for a good world. It just really has a Sisyphean kind of experience to it, and you can't get ahead. And the more I think about the fact that you can't get ahead and you can't seem to really make a progress that matters and that's sustainable, man, it all just seems kind of like a spitting into the wind. That's the perspective he's writing about. And then he says, as a result, this is verse 17, and this I think is important. He says, so I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, chasing after the wind. I hated all of the things I had toiled for under the sun. So he's saying, the more I think about this, the more I think about the Sisyphean experience that we all deal with, this working towards a wise way of living, working for something that's true and good and beautiful. Man, is it worth it? And can you really make progress? And man, it doesn't seem like it. And the more you sit and think about that reality, the more you have a hatred for life. In other words, it's like he's saying, I'm on the brink of snapping. Now, I don't think that the preacher, the wise sage in the text, snaps, because wisdom keeps him from doing so, which he'll get into as you read the whole corpus of it. But he's on the brink, and he's talking, I think, about something that's really important in terms of watching the madness of the world, which is that life, if you're not careful, can really have a toil to it that seems meaningless. And it can leave, that meaninglessness can really leave you hopeless. And when you feel hopeless, you might snap. We are, as human beings, I think, created to be, regardless of where you stand spiritually. When you look out at everyone on this earth, created in the image of God, full of dignity, full of worth, full of beauty inherently, we're meaning makers. We are desperate for it. And because the world has lost its prophetic voice in God, life has a real Sisyphean feel. It has a like, you try to live well, you try to make sense of things, you try to make progress, and you get pushed back down. And when you do, enough times, you feel a real hopelessness about your existence. You hate life, and you hate the toil, and you hate it all. And when you're in that kind of place, left unchecked, I think, left in that place long enough, you can snap. And when you snap, it turns into what? Well, I think one example is anarchy, violence, nihilistic kind of behavior. And I think of people, I think of our black brothers and sisters, at what level that I don't fully understand, at what level maybe does life at times feel very hopeless, like if you feel like you can't get ahead, or you feel like you can't get the world to see things that are wrong. And if you're not grounded in a real stable hope in something better, then why wouldn't you snap? And that can happen, of course, to any color. But why wouldn't people hate life? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I think many of us look out at the world right now that we see, and we see the madness of it all, and we ask ourselves why. But I would encourage you, if you're a Christian, to consider the fact that as Christian people, we should look at the madness and go, well, what did we expect? Like, in a world where all of creation is groaning, where we have a world where we still dehumanize people, some that look like us and some that don't look like us, and we rob people all the time of their worth, and we don't know how to love people well. And when we have to deal with that day in and day out, I think as Christian people, what did we expect? do we really expect for people to react different to this thing? And so, look, regardless of your perspective on the different things, the tanks rolling in and the protests, the violence, the whatever, the police and these issues, regardless of whether your perspective is, we're having to carry a heavy load. I mean, we've all had to, as a country, watch someone senselessly die. That should be agreed upon, and it should be agreed upon that there's nothing but grief that we should feel for that. But we have dealt with a long season now, which feels like a long season of an economic crisis. Prior to that, a health crisis that really still lingers. And now we've got a racial crisis, a very real racial crisis, a real one that's been around. And if you don't think that the cumulative pileup of all of those crises is not leading many people to a place of really wanting to snap, then I as gently as I could put, I don't think you're really thinking about the reality and frailty and the bandwidth that human beings actually carry. I think we've had our stomach full. I think people can't bear much more. And yeah, when you get to a place where you don't feel hopeful, you snap. You snap. And I think as Christians, at the very least, at the minimum, we should lament not just our sin, but we should lament the fact that we live in a world where people underneath that are desperate for meaning and hope are struggling to find it. And that should sadden us. And if we protest, great. If not, okay. But at the minimum, all Christians should be proclaiming. Like we should all be proclaiming not just what is true and good for all human beings, but we should be proclaiming that we need a new and a better kingdom where justice rolls down, and mercy rolls down, and love rolls in. And this is philosophical, I get it. You might be thinking this is way too abstract for me, but I just think that when you're trying to make sense out of a real confusing time, I think underneath it all, I would hope that you realize that we are living in a world that's grasping for meaning and hope. And when it cannot be found, you get people that hate life and hate each other. And this is not new. This text is ancient, and he's describing something that I think we see right now in front of us. But if God is real, and I believe he is, and he has sent his son to come and bring healing, and not just healing for you, not just forgiveness for you, but a new world where we finally live to the full potential of how God created us, where we honor not only him in his glory, but we honor each other. On earth as it is in heaven. Kingdom now. This is what we need. Because the kingdom means that people of all color come together and really embrace each other's beauty and goodness, and many other implications of that. I grieve what my brothers and sisters are dealing with in a world that probably feels hopeless. But we do not grieve as those without hope. If you're a Christian, I hope you remember that. And I hope you're praying, as I will be praying as well. Peace be with you.